Picture this. You're one half of the most beloved family on YouTube. 18 million people watch your every move. Your pregnancies, your victories, your picture-perfect life. You're living the dream that millions of creators chase. You have the house, the cars, the brand deals, the empire. But behind that camera, behind those smiles, behind those family vlogs, you're dying inside. You're questioning everything you thought you knew about the person sleeping next to you. You're finding text messages that make your stomach drop. You're hearing conversations that weren't meant for your ears. And the worst part? You can't talk to anyone about it because your private life, your private hell, is also your public brand. Your marriage isn't just your marriage, it's content. It's your livelihood. It's what 18 million people tune in to see. I've been losing sleep over the story. Not because it's gossip, but because what Catherine revealed on Call Her Daddy about the rise and fall of the Ace family exposes something so much deeper about human nature, about the mask we wear, and about what happens when our most intimate betrayals become everyone else's entertainment. And I have to be honest with you, the story hit me in ways I wasn't expecting, because as I was researching, as I was piecing together timeline after timeline, interview after interview, I started seeing patterns that made me question everything I thought I knew about public relationships, about fame, about the price we pay for living our lives in front of cameras. But here's what really got me, and what's going to shock you as we go through this together. Catherine's story isn't unique. The patterns, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the financial control, the systematic destruction of someone's sense of reality. I've seen this before. We've all seen this before. We just didn't recognize it because it was wrapped in brand deals and family vlogs. So here's what we're going to do together. We're going to take the story apart piece by piece. We're going to examine the psychology, the patterns, the red flags that were there from the beginning, but that everyone, including Catherine, missed or ignored. We're going to start with who Catherine and Austin really were before the fame, because understanding their individual psychology is crucial to understanding how everything unfolded. Then we're going to walk through the rise of the Ace family empire, and I mean really walk through it, looking at the content, messaging, the image they were selling versus what was really happening behind the scenes. From there, we're going to follow the breadcrumbs of the breakdown, the financial disasters, the cheating allegations, the gaslighting, the psychological manipulation. And I am going to show you things about the story that nobody else has connected, patterns that reveal so much more than just one failed marriage. By the end of this, you're going to understand not just what happened to Catherine and Austin, but why it happened, how it happens, and how to recognize these patterns in your own life, or the lives of the people you care about. Because this isn't just their story. It's a masterclass in human psychology, manipulation, and resilience. Let me paint you a picture of Catherine before she was McBroom, before she was a YouTube star, before she was anything other than a young woman trying to make sense of a world that had never felt safe. Catherine grew up in what she describes as toxic family environment. And I want to pause here because when we hear toxic family, we often think we understand what that means. But let me break down what this actually looks like in terms of psychological development, because it explains everything about how Catherine responded to Austin later. When you grow up in instability, your nervous system develops differently. You become hypervigilant to threat, because you also become incredibly adaptable to dysfunction. You learn to read rhythms, to manage other people's emotions, to make yourself small to avoid conflict. And here's the crucial part. You learn that love and chaos often come together. This is why Catherine's need for financial security wasn't just wanting nice things, It was about survival. When you've experienced the terror of instability as a child, financial security becomes this deep, primal need. It's about never feeling that helpless again, never being at the mercy of someone else's poor decisions. But here's what's tragic about this psychology. People who grow up in chaos often find themselves drawn to chaotic people later in life, because that chaos feels like home. It feels like love. The very instability that traumatized them as children becomes a template for what relationships feel like. And when Catherine met Austin, she was meeting someone who would activate every single one of these patterns in the most devastating way possible. Now let's talk about Austin McBroom, because understanding Austin is crucial to understanding how someone like Catherine, someone who was smart, successful, intuitive, could end up trapped in a cycle of manipulation for years. Austin had what psychologists call dark triad traits: narcissism, Machiavellism, and psychopathy. Now, I'm not diagnosing him, but I'm looking at patterns of his behavior that fit these categories: the charm, the manipulation, the ability to rewrite reality to suit his narrative, the lack of genuine empathy when his actions hurt others. People with these traits are often incredibly charismatic, especially in the beginning. They love bomb. They make you feel like you're the most special person in the world. They create this intense connection that feels like destiny. And for someone like Catherine, who was hungry for stability and love, that kind of intensity would have felt like everything she'd been missing. But here's what's insidious about this personality type. They don't see other people as full human beings with their own needs and rights. They see people as extensions of themselves, as sources of what they need: attention, validation, control, money, image management. Austin's background as an athlete also played into this. Athletes are trained to be competitive, to win at all cost, to never admit weakness or failure. But when you take that mentality into relationships, it becomes toxic. Everything about winning, about being right, about maintaining image and control. And the most dangerous thing about people like Austin is that they're not consciously evil. They genuinely believe their own narratives. They think they're the victim. They really think everyone else is overreacting. They really think they deserve something special treatment because of who they are. When Catherine and Austin met, it was like watching two puzzle pieces that shouldn't fit together, somehow clicking into place. She needed security and stability. He provided excitement and possibility. She needed someone who seemed confident and in control. He needed someone who would support his visions and manage the emotional labor of his life. But even in the beginning, there were signs of what was coming. Austin's need to be the center of attention, his way of making decisions without consultation, his ability to charm his way out of consequences, and Catherine's tendency to minimize her own needs, to adapt to his energy, to take responsibility for managing his emotions and image. What made their dynamic so dangerous was that both of their psychological patterns reinforced each other. Austin's need for control and Catherine's adaptive survival responses created a system where he could escalate his behavior while she normalized it, where he could cross boundaries while she adjusted her expectations. And this is the foundation that everything else was built on. Not love, not partnership, but a psychological dynamic where one person's need constantly mattered more than the other. A dynamic that would only get more extreme as the stakes got higher and the audience got bigger. In 2016, Austin and Catherine launched the Ace Family channel, and what happened next was nothing short of meteoric. But as I was going through their early content, studying the messages, the positioning, the way they presented their relationship, I started noticing things that tell a completely different story than what was happening behind the cameras. The Ace family brand was built on specific promises: authentic love, family values, the American dream, relationship goals. Every video reinforced this narrative of the perfect couple, building the perfect life. But when you understand psychology, when you know what to look for, you can see the cracks even in their early content. Austin positioned himself as the provider, the protector, the decision maker. Catherine was positioned as the supportive wife, the perfect mother, the grateful recipient of Austin's generosity. And this wasn't just content strategy. This was Austin training their audience to see their relationship through his lens, to normalize his control and her compliance. But here's what's brilliant and disturbing about what Austin did. He turned our audience into accomplices in Catherine's isolation. Every time viewers commented about how perfect their relationship was, every time someone praised Austin for being such a good provider, it reinforced Catherine's belief that she should be grateful, that she was lucky, that her concerns were invalid. The money started pouring in. We're talking about millions from ad revenue, sponsorships, merchandise, appearances, and this is crucial to understand because financial success became another tool of control. Austin could point to their wealth as evidence that his decisions were right, that Catherine should trust him, that questioning him was ungrateful. As the channel grew, so did the pressure to perform their relationship for the cameras. Every milestone, every moment of joy, every family experience had to be content. Their pregnancies, their births, their children's first steps. Nothing was private anymore. Think about what this does to a relationship. When your private moments become public content. When your income depends on maintaining a certain image. When millions of people have opinions about your marriage and family. The pressure is undeniable, and for someone like Catherine, who is already walking on eggshells, trying to maintain Austin's mood and needs, this added layer of performance must have been exhausting. One of the most disturbing aspects of their content strategy was how their children became central to their brand. Every cute moment, every milestone, every family interaction was filmed and monetized. And while this brought in massive revenue, it also meant that Catherine couldn't protect her children's privacy without threatening their income. Austin used the channel as another way to control the narrative about their relationship. When people saw him being affectionate on camera, when they saw him providing for his family, when they saw him playing the perfect dad and husband, it became harder for Catherine to voice concerns about his private behavior without seeming ungrateful or crazy. The success of the channel created what I call golden handcuffs. The lifestyle they were living, the income they were generating, the career they had built all depended on maintaining the illusion of their perfect relationship. Leaving would mean giving up not just Austin, but their entire livelihood, their career, their financial security. As I was researching this story, I went back and watched hours of their old content, looking for signs of what Catherine was experiencing behind the scenes. And once you know what to look for, the warning signs are everywhere. In their later videos, You can see Catherine's discomfort, the way she defers to Austin, the way she manages his moods, the moments where her smile doesn't reach her eyes. There are videos where you can literally watch her disassociate, where she's physically present but emotionally checked out. Listen to how Austin talks to Catherine in their videos versus how she talks to him. He interrupts her, dismisses her opinions, makes decisions for both of them without consultation. She apologizes constantly, qualifies her statements, looks to him for approval before expressing thoughts or feelings. Even more telling are the comments on their videos. While most are positive, there are scattered comments from viewers who picked up on the dynamic. People saying Catherine looked tired, that Austin seemed controlling, that something felt off about their interactions. These viewers were seeing what Catherine was living. The bigger the gap between their public image and private reality became, the more energy Catherine had to invest in maintaining the performance. And this is where you can see her starting to break down. The exhaustion, the strain, the effort it took to keep smiling while her world was falling apart behind the scenes. By this point, the Ace family empire was generating millions. They had built this massive audience. They were living the seemingly perfect life. But empires built on lies eventually crumble. And Catherine was about to discover just how far Austin was willing to go to maintain his image and control. Before we dive into the emotional and psychological abuse, we need to understand the financial abuse. Because for Catherine, the two were inseparable. Her childhood trauma around instability made financial security not just important, but essential for her mental health and sense of safety. What I discovered when I started digging into their financial history is a pattern of reckless decision making that goes back to the very beginning of their relationship. Austin consistently made major financial decisions without consulting Catherine, despite the fact that these decisions affected their entire family's security and future. Let's start with the real estate situation, because this is where Austin's pattern of financial control and recklessness becomes really clear. Multiple sources have reported on their foreclosure issues, their tax problems, their pattern of buying expensive properties and then struggling to maintain them. But here's what nobody else is talking about. This wasn't just poor financial management. This was a pattern of Austin using money as a tool of control and manipulation. By making unilateral financial decisions, by creating financial instability, by putting their family at risk, he was keeping Catherine in a constant state of anxiety and dependence. Financial abuse is one of the most effective forms of control because it attacks the victim's ability to be independent. When someone controls your access to money, controls your financial security, makes decisions that affect your ability to survive, they're essentially holding your basic needs hostage. For Catherine, this financial chaos was triggering every trauma response from her childhood. The person who was supposed to be her partner, her protector, her source of stability, was creating the exact kind of instability that had traumatized her as a child. But she couldn't leave, because leaving would mean giving up on the financial security that the channel provided. As I dug deeper into their business dealings, I found a consistent pattern. Austin making major business decisions without consulting Catherine, despite the fact that she was supposedly an equal partner in their brand and their life. There were investment decisions, partnership deals, major purchases, career choices, all made by Austin, or Catherine finding out after the fact. And when she expressed concerns or asked questions, she was dismissed as not understanding business, as being negative, as not supporting his vision. This is where the financial abuse started becoming psychological abuse. When Catherine questioned Austin's decisions, when she expressed concerns about their financial stability, when she asked to be included in major choices, she was made to feel like she was being unreasonable, ungrateful, or controlling. By positioning himself as the business expert and Catherine as someone who didn't understand these things, Austin was systematically undermining her confidence in her own judgment and her right to have input in decisions that affected her life and her children's future. What's particularly insidious is how Austin's financial decisions often required Catherine to sacrifice her own career opportunities or interests. She had to be available for content creation. She had to prioritize the channel. She had to put his vision above her own goals and dreams. The foreclosure situation wasn't just a financial disaster. It was the moment when Austin's reckless decision-making threatened the one thing Catherine needed most, a stable home for her children. For someone with Catherine's background, losing a home isn't just an inconvenience. It's a re-traumatization. It's every childhood fear about instability and insecurity coming true. And it was caused by the person who was supposed to protect her from exactly this kind of chaos. But here's what's most telling about Austin's character. When faced with the consequences of his financial decisions, he didn't take responsibility. He didn't apologize. He didn't change his behavior. Instead, he minimized the situation, blamed external factors, and continued making unilateral decisions. This is when you see Catherine starting to wake up to the reality of her situation. The financial instability, the exclusion from decisions, the gaslighting when she expressed concerns. She was starting to recognize the patterns, even if she wasn't ready to name them yet. What Austin may have realized is that financial chaos actually served his purposes. When Catherine was worried about money, when she was anxious about their security, when she was dependent on the income of their channel, she was less likely to challenge his behavior or consider leaving. The financial abuse was just the foundation. It created the conditions where Catherine was vulnerable, dependent, and isolated. And that's when the emotional and psychological abuse really escalated. Because Austin had learned that he could get away with anything as long as he maintained control of their financial security and public image. Catherine describes the beginning of her suspicions in a way that will be painfully familiar to anyone who's experienced infidelity. It wasn't one big discovery. It was 1,000 tiny moments that individually meant nothing, but together painted a devastating picture. It started with phone calls that Austin would step away to take. And look, everyone has private conversations sometimes, but Catherine describes a pattern, specific times of the day, specific behaviors, the way Austin would change when these calls came in. Then there were the behavioral changes. Austin becoming more distant, more critical, more defensive about innocent questions. He was picking fights about small things, creating distance, making Catherine feel like she was the problem. When Catherine would ask about these changes, when she'd express that something felt different, Austin would turn it back on her. She was being paranoid. She was being insincere. She was creating problems where none existed. This is classic gaslighting, making the victim question their own perceptions and instincts. What Austin was doing was psychological warfare. He was systematically undermining Catherine's trust in her own judgment while simultaneously giving her more and more reasons to be suspicious. It's a devastating combination that leaves the victim feeling crazy and helpless. And because their life was so public, because their relationship was their brand, Catherine couldn't talk to friends or family about what she was experiencing without potentially damaging their livelihood. She was trapped with her suspicions and her growing sense that something was terribly wrong. The text messages Catherine found weren't just evidence of Austin's infidelity. They were evidence of his complete disrespect for her and their marriage. These weren't innocent friendships that had crossed lines. These were calculated emotional affairs that showed Austin's true character. From what Catherine has shared, these messages revealed emotional intimacy with other women. Conversations that should have been happening with his wife. Sharing of personal information about their marriage and their problems. This wasn't just cheating, it was emotional betrayal at the deepest level. But what's most revealing about these messages is what they show about Austin's capacity for deception. He was living a double life, maintaining intimate relationships with multiple women, while playing the perfect husband and father for the cameras. Finding this evidence put Catherine in an impossible position. She now had proof of what she'd been suspecting, but confronting Austin would mean admitting she'd been snooping, and she knew he would use that to deflect from his own behavior. Even more devastating were the conversations Catherine overheard. Austin talking to other women in ways he hadn't talked to her in years, sharing intimacies and emotions that he'd been withholding from his wife. Try to imagine what this does to someone psychologically. The person you love, the person you've built your life with, the person you trust above all others is not only betraying you, but actively choosing to give other women the emotional intimacy they're denying you. When Catherine finally confronted Austin about what she'd found, his response was textbook manipulator behavior. He didn't deny the facts. He couldn't. The evidence was too clear. But he minimized their significance and turned the focus back on Catherine's invasion of privacy. Austin's approach was to admit to the smallest possible version of the truth, while denying everything else. Yes, he had been talking to other women, but it was just friendship. Yes, some conversations were inappropriate, but nothing physical had happened. Yes, he had made mistakes, but Catherine was overreacting. Even more damaging was Austin's strategy of blame shifting. He would acknowledge some wrongdoings, but then explain how Catherine's behavior, their relationship problems, or external stresses had contributed to his choices. He was making her partially responsible for his betrayal. Austin would make promises to change, to be more transparent, to work on their relationship. But these promises were never backed up by actual behavioral changes. Instead, he would modify his behavior just enough to reduce the immediate crisis, then gradually return to his previous patterns. Catherine's response to these confrontations shows the psychological impact of sustained gaslighting and betrayal. She wanted to believe Austin's explanations. She wanted the promises to be real. She wanted to return to the stability of not knowing for certain what she suspected. Each confrontation followed the same pattern. Catherine would present evidence. Austin would minimize and deflect. Catherine would accept partial truths and false promises, and the cycle would continue. This pattern went on for years, with Catherine's sense of reality becoming more and more distorted with each repetition. Before we go deeper into Catherine's story, I need to explain exactly what gaslighting is, because it's one of the most devastating forms of psychological abuse, and it's exactly what Austin was doing to Catherine for years. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation, where the abuser systematically undermines the victim's sense of reality, memory, and judgment. The goal is to make the victim dependent on the abuser's version of reality, even when that version contradicts their own experiences and instincts. It's not just lying, it's a systematic campaign to make someone question their own sanity. The abuser denies things that happened, minimizes the victim's emotional responses, reframes events to make the victim the problem, and consistently presents alternate versions of reality that favor the abuser. Gaslighting works because it exploits our natural tendency to trust the people we love and our desire to maintain relationships. When someone we care about consistently tells us our perceptions are wrong, we start to doubt ourselves rather than doubt them. The effects of sustained gaslighting are devastating. Victims lose confidence in their own judgment, become dependent on the abuser for validation of reality, develop anxiety and depression, and often struggle to trust their own instincts long after the relationship ends. Everything Catherine describes about her relationship with Austin fits the pattern of sustained gaslighting. Her instincts were telling her something was wrong, but Austin was systematically undermining her trust in those instincts. Austin's first line of defense was always complete denial. When Catherine brought up concerns or evidence, he would deny not just the facts but the validity of her perceptions of the facts. That didn't happen. You're remembering it wrong. You're being paranoid. When denial was impossible because the evidence was too clear, Austin would minimize the significance of his actions. It wasn't that big of a deal. You're overreacting. It didn't mean anything. This strategy acknowledges some wrongdoings while making the victim feel foolish for caring about it. Austin will often respond to Catherine's concerns by attacking her character or behavior. You're too sensitive. You're always looking for problems. You don't trust me. This shifts the focus from his behavior to a response to his behavior. After major confrontations, Austin would often engage in love bombing, excessive affection, gifts, promises, attention to make Catherine feel special and hopeful that things were changing. This created an addictive cycle of crisis and reconciliation that kept Catherine hooked. Throughout all of this, Austin reinforced Catherine's isolation by reminding her that their problems were private, that sharing them would damage their brand, that she couldn't talk to friends or family because they wouldn't understand or might gossip. Catherine describes living in a state of hypervigilance, always watching Austin's behavior, analyzing every interaction, looking for signs of deception or changes in mood. This is exhausting and traumatizing, but it becomes necessary for survival in a gaslighting relationship. The more Austin denied her reality, the more Catherine began to doubt herself. She would second-guess her own memories, question her own judgment, and wonder if she was really being paranoid or oversensitive. This self-doubt is exactly what gaslighting is designed to create. To cope with the constant psychological assault, Catherine began shutting down emotionally. She stopped trusting her instincts, stopped expressing her concerns, stopped expecting honesty or respect. This emotional numbing is a trauma response to sustained abuse. Living with gaslighting doesn't just affect your relationship, it affects your entire sense of self. Catherine describes losing touch of who she was outside of Austin's version of her. She became so focused on managing his moods and reactions that she lost connection to her own needs and desires. This cycle of abuse and reconciliation created what psychologists call trauma bonding, an addiction to the relationship despite its toxicity. The highs of Austin's love bombing felt more intense because of the lows of his abuse, creating a powerful psychological dependency. But even in the depths of this psychological prison, part of Catherine was fighting to survive. She was collecting evidence, documenting patterns, following on to pieces of reality. Even when Austin was telling her she was crazy. This preservation of truth would eventually become her path to freedom. While Catherine was living through this psychological nightmare, privately, she still had to perform the role of the happy wife and mother for millions of subscribers. Think about the psychological toll of having to smile, laugh, and act loving towards someone who is systematically destroying your sense of reality. Every family vlog, every couple's video, every social media post was essentially Catherine having to lie about her reality. She had to perform joy while experiencing trauma, perform love while experiencing betrayal, perform stability while living in chaos. The income from their channel depended on maintaining this image of relationship perfection. Catherine couldn't tell the truth about her experiences without potentially destroying their livelihood, their children's financial security, and the career they had built together. The public nature of the relationship meant Catherine couldn't seek support from friends or family without risking their private issues becoming public gossip. She was trapped in her suffering by the very fame that was supposed to be their blessing. Living this double life created what psychologists call disassociation. Catherine had to split herself into the public persona who was happy and grateful, and the private person who was suffering and questioning everything. The psychological splitting is a trauma response that can have lasting effects. Going back through their content, with the knowledge of what Catherine was experiencing, you can see the signs of her distress. The moment where her smile doesn't reach her eyes, the way she defers to Austin in conversations, the times you can literally hear her disassociate while filming. Once again, listen to how Catherine speaks in their later videos. She is constantly apologizing, qualifying her statements, looking to Austin for approval before expressing opinions. These are signs of someone who has been systematically undermined and controlled. Even their children's behavior in videos tells a story. You can see them naturally gravitating towards Catherine for comfort and emotional regulation, suggesting that she was the primary emotional caregiver while Austin was focused on performance and image. In their couple's content, there's a notable absence of genuine emotional intimacy. Their interactions feel performative rather than authentic, staged rather than spontaneous. They were acting out the idea of a loving relationship rather than actually having one. By the later years of their marriage, you can see Catherine's exhaustion becoming harder to hide. The energy required to maintain the performance while living through the abuse was becoming unsustainable. There are moments in their later content where Catherine's mask slips, moments where you can see her real emotions breaking through, moments where she looks genuinely sad or disconnected, despite trying to maintain the happy family image. What kept Catherine going through this period wasn't a relationship or a career. It was her children. She was trying to maintain stability for them, trying to protect them from the chaos of their parents' relationship, trying to preserve their innocence and security, while maintaining the public performance. Catherine was going through an internal reckoning. She was starting to acknowledge to herself what she had been denying, that her marriage was not just troubled, but abusive, that Austin was not just flawed, but manipulative, that her situation was not just difficult, but unsustainable. All of this was building towards a moment when the performance would become impossible to maintain, when the gap between public image and private reality would become too wide to bridge. When Catherine would finally reach the point where her need for authenticity would overcome. Catherine describes the moment everything changed. It wasn't another text message or another lie. It was the realization that her children were starting to notice the dysfunction. They were beginning to ask questions about why mommy seemed sad, why daddy was always on his phone, why there was tension in the house even when the cameras weren't rolling. This is when Catherine's protective instincts finally erode her trauma responses. She realized that staying in this toxic dynamic wasn't just destroying her, it was potentially damaging her children's understanding of what healthy relationships look like. For the first time in years, Catherine started prioritizing her own perception of reality over Austin's version of events. She stopped trying to make sense of his explanations and started trusting her own instincts about what she was experiencing. Catherine began systematically documenting Austin's behavior, not to confront him, but to maintain her own grip on reality. She was creating evidence that she could refer back to when Austin undeniably tried to gaslight her about events. Slowly, carefully, Catherine began reaching out to trusted friends and family members. She started sharing small pieces of her experience, testing whether others would validate her perceptions or dismiss them like Austin did. Catherine describes a confrontation that was different from all the others. This time, she wasn't seeking Austin's validation or trying to get him to admit the truth. She was simply stating her reality and her boundaries. When Austin realized that his usual manipulation tactics weren't working, that Catherine wasn't backing down or accepting his reframing, he escalated. The mask came off completely, revealing the person Catherine was trying to avoid seeing for years. This confrontation was the moment Catherine realized that there were no versions of their relationship that would ever be healthy or safe for her or her children. All her hoping, trying, and adapting had been in service of an impossible goal. Even with clarity about her situation, Catherine faced the practical reality that leaving Austin meant potentially giving up their massive income, their lifestyle, and her children's financial security. The golden handcuffs were real and substantial. Austin had resources, public support, and a willingness to manipulate narratives. Catherine worried about how a custody battle might play out, especially given Austin's ability to charm people and present himself as the victim. Leaving would mean admitting to millions of subscribers that their perfect relationship was a lie, that she had been performing happiness while suffering abuse, that the brand they had built was fundamentally fraudulent. Catherine began quietly consulting with lawyers, understanding her rights, and preparing for the complex legal battles that would inevitably come with divorcing someone like Austin who had so much to lose. Perhaps most importantly, Catherine began preparing herself emotionally for the reality that Austin would not go quietly, that he would use every tool at his disposal to maintain control, and that the public breakup would be as traumatic as their private relationship had been. Catherine's exit wasn't impulsive or emotional. It was strategic and calculated. She had learned from years of Austin's manipulation that she needed to be prepared for every possible response he might have. Before making public moves, Catherine strengthened her support network. She reconnected with friends Austin had isolated her from, rebuilt relationships with family members, and found professionals who understood psychological abuse. Catherine began exploring her options for financial independence post-divorce. This meant understanding the value of their assets, her rights to their shared income, and her potential for rebuilding a career outside of the Ace family brand. Every decision Catherine made was filtered through what would be best for her children, not just financially, but emotionally and psychologically. She was determined to protect them from as much of the fallout as possible. Working with her legal team, Catherine built a comprehensive case that documented Austin's financial irresponsibility, his pattern of deception, and his psychological abuse. This wasn't just about divorce, it was about establishing a legal record of his behavior. When Catherine finally went public with her story on the Call Her Daddy podcast, it wasn't just an interview, it was a masterpiece of strategic communication. She told her truth in a way that was impossible to dismiss or reframe. Catherine was strategic about what she revealed and how she revealed it. She shared enough to validate her experience and help other women in similar situations, but not so much that it would unnecessarily harm her children or compromise her legal position. The response to Catherine's interview was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of people who had followed the Ace family suddenly understood that they had been watching a performance, not a reality. True to form, Austin's response followed the classic abuser playbook: denial, minimization, victim playing, and counterattack. But this time, Catherine wasn't isolated and wasn't doubting herself. For the first time in their relationship, Catherine controlled the narrative. She had the platform, the evidence, and most importantly, the clarity to tell her story without Austin's interference or reframing. The revelation had immediate consequences for the Ace family brand, Austin's reputation, and their financial empire. But for Catherine, these consequences were the price of freedom. Catherine's healing journey involved therapy, rebuilding her sense of self, reconnecting with her own needs and desires, and learning to trust her instincts again after years of having them systematically undermined. Perhaps most importantly, Catherine focused on helping her children adjust to their new reality, explaining age-appropriate truths about their parents' relationship, and helping them understand that none of it was their fault. Catherine's courage in speaking out inspired countless other women to share their own stories of psychological abuse, financial control, and manipulation. She became inadvertently a voice for survivors everywhere. While the end of the Ace family was traumatic and difficult, he also represented the beginning of Catherine's authentic life, one where she would make decisions based on her own values and needs rather than Austin's demands and image management. One of the most harmful myths about abusive relationships is that the victims stay because they're weak, naive, or somehow complicit in their abuse. Catherine's story destroys this myth completely. She was intelligent, successful, and strong, yet still found herself trapped. The cycle of abuse and reconciliation creates powerful psychological bonds that are actually stronger than healthy relationships in some ways. The intermittent reinforcement of Austin's love bombing made Catherine's attachment to him addictive rather than healthy. Austin didn't start with major abuse. He started with small boundary violations, minor manipulations, and gradual isolation. By the time Catherine recognized this pattern, she had already normalized so much dysfunction that major red flags seemed like minor issues. The golden handcuffs of their shared success made leaving seem impossible. Catherine wasn't just leaving a relationship. She was potentially giving up her career, her income, her lifestyle, and her children's financial security. The public nature of their relationship created additional barriers to leaving. Catherine couldn't seek help without potentially exposing their private issues, and she couldn't tell the truth without destroying the brand they had built together. Austin's relationship with their children became another tool of control. Catherine worried about custody, about the children's financial security, and about how divorce might affect them emotionally and practically. Austin was a master of love bombing, showering Catherine with attention, affection, and gifts after periods of abuse and neglect. This created an addictive cycle where Catherine was constantly chasing the high of Austin's positive attention. Austin's gaslighting wasn't random or impulsive. It was systematic and strategic. He consistently denied Catherine's reality, minimized her concerns, and reframed events to make her question her own judgment and memory. Austin systematically isolated Catherine from friends, family, and independent sources of validation. He made her dependent on his approval and his version of reality by cutting off other perspectives and support systems. By making unilateral financial decisions and creating financial instability, Austin kept Catherine in a constant state of anxiety and dependence. She couldn't challenge his behavior without risking their financial security. Austin used their public image as another form of control. Catherine couldn't tell the truth about her experience without potentially destroying their brand, their income, and their reputation. When confronted with his behavior, Austin would position himself as the victim of Catherine's accusations and paranoia. This made Catherine feel guilty for having legitimate concerns about his actions. The Ace family story reveals the dark side of social media relationships, the pressure to perform happiness, the financial incentives to maintain fake perfection, and the way public validation can mask private dysfunction. When your relationship becomes your business, when your private life becomes public content, when your income depends on maintaining a certain image, the normal protections and boundaries of relationships are compromised. Austin's behavior wasn't unique or exceptional. It was a concentrated version of manipulation tactics that are unfortunately common in many relationships. Catherine's story helps us recognize these patterns in less extreme forms. Catherine's experience demonstrates why financial independence is crucial for safety in relationships. When someone controls your economic security, they control your ability to leave unhealthy situations. Catherine's decision to tell her story publicly wasn't just about her healing. It was about breaking the cycle of shame and secrecy that allows abuse to continue. Her courage gave other women permission to acknowledge their own experiences. Despite the trauma and devastation of Catherine's experience, her story ultimately demonstrates human resilience and the possibility of healing. She survived, she escaped, and she rebuilt her own life on her own terms. Looking back at Catherine and Austin's story, the warning signs were there from the very beginning. The financial secrecy, the isolation tactics, the dismissal of Catherine's concerns, the pattern of unilateral decision-making. One of the most important lessons from this story is how quickly we can normalize dysfunction when it's introduced gradually, and when we're invested in maintaining the relationship. We must learn to look beyond social media presentations and public images to consider what might be happening behind the scenes. Perfect relationships don't exist, and performances of perfection often hide serious problems. Catherine's journey from victim to survivor to advocate demonstrates that healing from psychological abuse is possible. It takes time, support, and professional help, but people can recover their sense of self and build healthy lives after trauma. Catherine's courage in speaking out has created a community of support for other survivors. Her story has helped countless women recognize their own experiences and seek help. Perhaps most importantly, Catherine's decision to leave has given her children a chance to grow up with a different model of what relationships can be. One based on respect, honesty, and authentic love rather than control and performance. If Catherine's story resonates with your own experience, Please know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships based on respect and equality. You deserve to have your reality validated and your boundaries honored. If you know someone who might be experiencing what Catherine experienced, the most important thing you can do is listen without judgment and validate their reality. Don't try to fix the situation. Just be a consistent source of support and truth. We all have the responsibility to look beyond the performance of social media relationships and support authentic connection over a perfect presentation. We need to create cultures where people can tell the truth about their experiences without shame or judgment. Catherine's story isn't just about the fall of a YouTube empire or the end of a famous marriage. It's about the triumph of truth over lies, authenticity over performance, and human dignity over control and manipulation. It's about the courage it takes to choose reality over comfort and freedom over security. Years from now, when people remember DA's family, I hope they remember not just the rise and fall of their empire, but Catherine's courage in speaking her truth. Her story will continue to help people recognize toxic patterns, trust their own instincts, and believe that they deserve better. DA's family may be over, but Catherine, her story of survival, healing, and hope is just the beginning. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this story has affected you, please reach out for support. You are not alone. Your reality matters, and healing is possible. Stay cozy, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.